Hey everyone, how are you doing? I hope you're all doing wonderfully well, and today I bring you a game that I'm almost certain will become one of your favorites. Take a look at this board, so beautiful, so full of pieces. This white rook, yep, it's going to be sacrificed. This knight is going to be sacrificed too in this game. The bishop too, the queen as well, and this bishop too. The knight and the rook won't escape either. From the fate of being sacrificed for an absolutely brilliant victory by the player with the white pieces. It's not every day you see a game where the player sacrifices literally every piece except the king, but in this game, that's exactly what happened. I'm bringing you the game between Grigory Serper, I think I pronounced that wrong, but that's okay, against Ioannis Nikolaidis. Let's go. White starts with c4. And Nikolaidis plays g6, fianchettoing the bishop. This is the English Great Serpent variation, which usually transposes into some other opening. White then plays e4, we have bishop to g7, d4, and there it is, right? With three central pawns, dark squared bishop fianchetto. This will very likely transpose into a king's Indian defense. Then comes the 6, knight to c3, and knight to f6. And we have the king's Indian, right? The player with white here plays a variation I haven't seen in a long time. This is a variation that is very rarely played with the knight to a 2. The idea behind knight to a 2 might seem like a passive or strange move, blocking the bishop's square, but the plan is to bring the knight to g3. Usually the player with white in this variation, which is called the Kramer variation, doesn't want to castle, that's it. If black continues, for example, by castling here, which is not what was played, we would have the knight on g3 with extremely aggressive ideas of h4, h5, and basically tearing apart this king here. There have already been games in the master database where e5 and d5 were played, weakening the c5 square. So black plays h5, for what purpose? To prevent white's b4 and to be able to solidify the knight on that square. White continues developing, then we have knight to a 6, h4, knight to c5. So, sorry, first here c6, but h5. So this is the idea that the white player wants to play. He wants to keep the king in the center, since the center is closed, and attack on the king side himself. Meanwhile, the black player will regret having set up this fianchetto. Against the fianchetto, h4, h5, and mate. However, the black player, who was already wary, already an old hand so to speak, knew very well that this was white's plan. Therefore, he also doesn't castle. He plays knight to d7, then we have the knight on g3, and the black player starts to take space in the center of the board with calmer moves. He plays c6, which prepares a b5 to contest white's center. White continues developing, still not committing to castling. And the black player plays a 6, also not wanting to castle, but rather to play with the idea of b5. He wants to gain space on the queen side. Then we have the bishop on e3 developing, and h5 from black. Look at that, the black player not only doesn't castle, but also prevents white's traditional plan, taking it for himself. Space on the king side with h5, which obviously prevents h5 from white. h4 now is a move that simply weakens g4, it's not the kind of move we want to play. And since black hasn't castled, black still keeps alive the idea of playing h4 themselves, kicking away white's knight. A very interesting game so far. White then decides to play f3 just to solidify the center. Now we have these three pawns supported by the f-pawn. Then we have b5 from black fighting for the center of the board through the queen side. It wouldn't make sense not to play it after having played c6 and a 6. And here, white, regardless of what happens, will have to deal with the fact that the black player is starting to put pressure on the center of the board. Ideas like e5, c5 perhaps will start to come up in the future. So the white player makes a decision to take space. He plays c5, right? He allows the exchange of his central pawns, he allows pawn takes pawn to be played, and he will no longer have that central pawn. On the d4 square, in return, he ends up gaining a bit of space. So after d takes c5 and d takes c5, white no longer has all that central control. However, the white player has a strong pawn on this square, which, although it can be a target, is very easily defended. And it prevents the black player, for example, from activating the light-squared bishop through the b7 square. So it's a conscious decision by white to take space on the queen side, even though it wasn't the correct choice. Here, black is slightly better. Black plays queen to c7, and white chooses to castle. The moment white castles, black continues the attack with the king in the center, h4. So do you see how the idea here was basically reversed? What white wanted to do to black, black is now doing to white. We have a knight on h1. You might imagine that the move h3 would be extremely annoying in this position, but if you play h3, white is not forced to capture, nor are they forced to let black capture. Instead, they can keep everything closed with g3. And the reality is that the white king is perfectly safe, and this pawn ends up becoming a long-term target because it's much easier to attack with ideas like rook to e1, bishop to f1, knight to f2. Than it is to defend it. Only this rook can really defend the pawn easily. Therefore, the black player keeps this possibility of h3 active but doesn't play it. Instead, he plays knight to h5, freeing up the bishop along this diagonal. The idea of moving the knight off this diagonal is to play b5, attack the knight, and win the b2 pawn. So the white player plays queen to d2, and now the queen defends the b pawn. We have e5 from black. Okay, fixing the pawn on e4, and now the traditional King's Indian attack with f5, f4, g5, g4 can start to flow, while white's counterattack plan on the queen side isn't going very well. And white plays knight to f2, bringing the knight toward the center of the board. Now we have knight to f8 from black, with the idea that the bishop will defend the h3 square. Maybe preparing an h3 move, right? In the future. And that knight basically wasn't doing anything on d7. So we're going to try to centralize it in the future, right? From this square, the knight can go here or here. So knight to f8 is an interesting move, and white plays a 4. In this position, the black player wasn't able to convert their advantage very well. They couldn't turn the advantage into an attack, and white has essentially an equal position, maybe slightly better. So a 4, the goal is to punish black's lack of development. Black still has the rook on its original square, the bishop on its original square, the other rook on its original square, and the king in the center of the board. We're trying to open up the position, we're trying to capture ourselves, right? And if he captures with this pawn, for example, rook takes. If he then captures with this pawn, his rook is basically no defense. So for example, knight takes the b pawn, bishop takes the b pawn. These are all possibilities. And the black player doesn't see white's idea. Black plays b4, kicking the knight, and at this moment, white plays. And there is a single move that secures an advantage for the white player. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to find Grigory Jurevich's brilliant idea. A move that basically wins the game. It's not the move that wins the game, but it's the move that starts the sequence that black can't stop, and that takes this match out of their control. It's an absolutely brilliant, very beautiful idea. So, pause the video, try it on your own, and don't forget to like the video. If you're enjoying it so far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you were able to find the unbelievably beautiful move, knight to d5, congratulations, it wasn't easy. Knight to d5 is a beautiful knight sacrifice, with the goal, of course, that if your opponent accepts it, you will capture with the e-pawn, and now you have two passed and connected pawns, which are certainly worth much more than a single piece in this kind of position. They are two central pawns that completely restrict the freedom of the black pieces, and at the same time, they are passed and connected. They can advance very easily. They could even end up becoming a queen in the future. Was the black player forced to capture this knight? No, he could have simply moved the queen in this position. He could maybe play, I don't know, queen to d8. The problem is that the knight on b6 is extremely annoying. So, for example, this is a maneuver that definitely makes the black position extremely difficult to play. So, black players decide to capture the knight and try to play against the connected passed pawns. Black plays f5, trying to gain a bit of space on the king's side. And the clear idea is f4, for example. If the bishop has to move, the passed pawn will fall. So, the white player plays d6, attacking the queen. Then we have queen to c6. And now, if you haven't found the first brilliant move of this game, I invite you to try to find the second brilliant move, which is also exceptional. Alright, here the white player makes a move. You've already had time to pause before I say it. If not, now is your chance. I hope you've already seen the incredible idea. Bishop to b5. This is the second piece sacrifice for exactly the same reason. So it's a piece sacrifice to connect and advance yet another pawn in this mass of central pawns here. And while with the last sacrifice you had the option to accept it or not, here there truly is no choice because the queen is pinned to the king. So if you don't accept the sacrifice, you'll lose the queen. And consequently the game, black plays pawn takes bishop, and we have pawn takes on b5 with tempo on the queen. So now white has sacrificed two pieces, one to bring the e-pawn to the d5 square, and the other to bring the a-pawn to the b5 square. There were two consecutive sacrifices to create passed pawns, and white is completely winning because they have three passed and connected pawns. In this position, there's also the problem that the rook is hanging, so black's lack of development is coming back to bite. Now, because this rook is undefended, at least the only piece defending it is the queen, and if queen to b7, for example, then c6 will follow, threatening the queen, and in this position, for example, the queen can't keep defending the rook. If by any chance we have something like rook takes rook, trading the queen for the two rooks here, the real problem with this sequence isn't the material. The material is equal, but the problem is the lack of development. The player with the black pieces won't be able to stop all these passed pawns with all their pieces poorly coordinated in the corner, still on their original squares. Therefore, the player with the black pieces decides to sacrifice some material back. He sees that if he plays queen to b7, there's truly no future. If rook takes rook directly, then pawn takes queen. That also leads nowhere. Three central passed pawns, connected, and all the pieces are uncoordinated. Even though the material favors the player with the black pieces here, maybe the material is equal, I haven't counted exactly, but even if the material situation isn't that bad, because black lost the queen but got two rooks for it, the lack of piece coordination and development here truly gives black no chance to stop it. Ideas like d7, you'll have to sacrifice two pieces just to stop the passed pawn, for example, right? You have to sacrifice both the bishop and the knight just to prevent the pawn from promoting, and then white is winning in terms of material. So the player with the black pieces decides to play queen takes b5, right? He sacrifices the rook with the aim of at least getting rid of one of the pawns. Since the player with white had already sacrificed two pieces, even with this rook sacrifice giving back some of the material, the game is not materially unbalanced. But now white has compensation, which is the connected passed pawns and also the material, because black had to sacrifice to stop white's idea. Let's go. The player with black plays the queen to c6, right? Stopping the pawns, blocking the pawns, and attacking the rook. And white plays rook to a1, bringing both rooks to the open file, now doubled. The player with black plays f4, gaining a tempo on the bishop. So we've already seen this idea before. What did the player with black want? To put pressure on the pawn with the aim of eventually playing f4. And now the bishop has to move. Actually, the bishop is trapped, right? And the pawn is going to fall then. The player with black was hoping that now he would save the position. But white plays rook to a7, sacrificing the bishop. It's yet another piece being sacrificed. This time, the sacrifice can't be accepted, right? If the pawn takes the bishop, rook to a7 is just too strong a move. And in this position, the computer even calculates checkmate. I'm not going to show it because it's checkmate in 12 moves, right? So it was probably a sacrifice made intuitively. The player with white knew there was no way it could go wrong. The rook is going to infiltrate, the king will have to go to a8. Then there's queen takes on b4, the queen infiltrates as well. The position is incredibly hard to play for black here, so black simply defends, plays the knight to d7, and defends against the idea of the rook on e7. And then we have rook takes bishop, which is another sacrifice, this time a sacrifice of the exchange, with the goal of breaking through the blockade that the queen had over the pawn on c5. We have queen takes rook and queen to d5, sacrificing the bishop. Why? To bring the queen into the attack. So here, the queen is supporting c6, supporting queen check, with a rook infiltrated on the 7th rank threatening checkmate. Ideas like c6 start to appear, kicking the knight, and then playing d7 with a fork on the queen and the opponent's king. This kind of idea starts to emerge in the position. And the player with the black pieces can't find a move to play in this position if they don't accept the bishop. Because is it threatening the queen on c6? Is it threatening c6? It is. If you don't take the bishop, can you defend against these threats? No. So if the opponent is going to create threats anyway, at least take the material. So pawn takes bishop, queen to c6, check. Now we have king f8 and rook takes knight, right? Recovering some of the material. Rook takes knight. Now at least is the material equal? No, because the player with the black pieces captures another piece with the pawn, takes the knight, check, and we have the king on f1. Why? To get out of check. If you take the pawn, then the queen takes on c5 and comes with check. As a result, the player with the black pieces gains the initiative. And probably here, with the queen infiltrating, with the knight infiltrating, black is back in the game. Therefore, the player with the white pieces sacrifices the knight, or rather, trades a rook and knight for a knight. But when the opponent takes the knight, he plays king to f1 to prevent the black player from having any checks. In this case, queen takes pawn. It's not possible because there's checkmate. So the black player plays queen to d8, offering a queen trade and holding off the checkmate threat. And the white player plays rook to f7. This move is absolutely incredible, don't you think? Because he's giving up the rook for no reason, right? The square is defended twice. How come? Why is he sacrificing? The rook with rook on f7? Know that this is by far the best move in the position. And the idea is that the queen can no longer defend the 8th rank. So after queen takes, the queen infiltrates on the 8th rank. And the pawn advance becomes the idea to promote a second queen. Black, as incredible as it seems, still doesn't have any checks in this position. So after queen to e8, d6 with a tempo on the queen, the black player has almost nothing left to do. Because look, if you take the queen, it doesn't help. He'll make another one, and then he'll push this pawn and make yet another. If you don't take the queen, pawn takes queen, it's going to happen, and there's not much you can do about it because your queen is pinned to the king. Therefore, the black player has to play king to f7, and now he loses the queen and white captures, making another one. We have rook takes queen, and in this position the material is again not balanced. But the problem for the black player is the poor coordination of the pieces. The knight is in the corner, the bishop is aiming at its own pawn, the king is exposed, and white has a pawn 3 squares away from promotion. So the white player starts to cook up some checks to see if he can make progress with the passed pawn. He plays queen, b7, little rook e7 defense, and c6. Again, it's that idea we've already seen. If rook takes queen, then he'll simply take back and make another queen. And in practice, you traded a rook for a pawn, right? Because the resulting position will be that the white player will have a queen anyway, but he won't have a pawn and you won't have a rook. So, the black player plays e4. This move is interesting, with the goal of moving the pawn out of the bishop's way and trying somehow to coordinate his own pieces, to activate his own pieces. White plays c7, advancing to promote. Black responds with e3. The idea behind e3 is interesting because suddenly, if you make another queen, at least he has e2. So for example, if you advance and make another queen, e2 check, he takes on f2, he makes a queen and wins the game. So the white player cannot allow this e2 to happen. He plays queen to d5 check, king to f6, queen to d6 check, then king to f7. d5 check, king to f6, this repetition of moves might make it seem like white is aiming for a draw. The reality is that it's always interesting to repeat moves when you can, for 2 reasons. First, if it's an in-person tournament, there's usually something called time control. On move 40, which is when you reach the 40th move of the game, in this case they're on move 39, you receive additional time. Another reason why repeating moves is interesting is because you gain time on the clock when there's increment, when you repeat. So it's more time for you to think. You also reach the time control faster, and there's the psychological aspect of showing your opponent that you could draw if you wanted to. But that you're not interested in a draw because you're going to beat them. The player with the white pieces then plays the queen to d6. When the king goes to f7, instead of playing the queen to d5, which would draw the game, white plays the much more interesting queen, takes rook on e7, sacrificing the last remaining piece. Up to this point, he sacrificed both rooks, both knights, both bishops, and now the queen. And the purpose of this sacrifice is very clear. It's to enter this endgame, where, after king takes queen, e2. It's no longer a problem, because the e1 square is no longer defended by the rook, so we can promote to a queen and the opponent has no counterplay. Before, he had e2, king takes, and he would promote to a rook, defending with checkmate. Now that doesn't work anymore. So, the player with the black pieces is now in a completely lost endgame, where it's a queen against 2 pieces. The game continues for a few more moves, but the queen is simply superior. So the player with the black pieces plays here, bishop to h6, we have queen to c5, check, king to e8, queen to b5, check, king to d8, queen to b6, check, king to d7. And the queen forks the pieces. So material starts to fall. Black still tries a trick playing e2 check, which is actually a pretty clever move. e2 check here. Suddenly, if you take it, he has knight to f4, which wins the queen. And the game subsequently, right? But white doesn't fall for it, they take the f2 pawn, bishop to e3, check, it's another little trick, it's exactly the same idea, right? Actually, it's not exactly the same idea, but it's another trick, right? The idea here is that now you're sacrificing the bishop to promote the pawn. So the player with white simply keeps an eye on the promotion square. Now the loss of material is actually inevitable. It's better if you have a knight on f4, then queen to f7 will come, check, and the checks will continue. Definitely, this bishop is going to fall. As a result, the player with black finally accepts their fate, resigns the game, and white wins, literally sacrificing all of their pieces. That's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful game, one of the most stunning I've ever covered here on the channel. Take care and see you next time.